Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the late February edition. You just missed a fascinating conversation about the hair on Ricardo Montalban's chest, whether or not it's real. So you can certainly contribute and offer your perspective on that in the chat if you would like to during this episode of 3Squares. Welcome. We are thrilled you are here. I'm Charlie Arnott with Look East and the Center for Food Integrity, committed to keeping the food system trustworthy, with my co-host Kevin Ryan and Susan Schwally.
And I'm Susan Schwally. I'm with QualSites. I lead their global sensor business. What does that mean? It simply means we're using technology to understand the secret life of food, cleaning, household products. So with the secret life between purchase and repurchase, all of that usage consumption information.
And I'm Kevin Ryan with Malachi Strategy and Research, helping CPG retailers and food ingredient companies at the front end of strategy and innovation.
So I got back from an event a few weeks ago and reached out to Kevin and Susan and said, you are not going to believe what I heard. There's a program that overcame political, social, organizational, cultural barriers to actually make something happen. And as a pragmatic optimist, I understand that that's a wonderful thing to hope for, but also incredibly difficult to make happen. So today I am absolutely thrilled, and we could actually spend hours on this, but we only have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to get to it. Thrilled to have our guest, Neeti Jain. She is an environmental scientist and environmental justice practitioner, currently serving as the Strategic Partnerships Advisor for the New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy. She works on the intersection of food and climate, supporting the city in efforts to reduce carbon emissions from food procurement and build a healthier and more resilient food system for New Yorkers. Easy peasy, just a walk in the park. She holds a bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Chicago and a master's degree in environmental science from the Yale School of the Environment. I wonder if that's kind of like the Ohio State. That has to be the environment. A Los Angeles native, she has made her way across the three coasts, and now spends her time lurking around the underwater dioramas at the American Museum of Natural History. Neeti, thank you for taking a little bit of time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Excellent. All right, so let's start with a bit of background. This was an enormous project. I'm not even sure how to describe it, but what you were able to achieve with New York City's food and climate work in what you described at the event that we were both attending, really, I was overwhelmed with admiration for you and Chef DiMaiolo, the work that was being done. So again, enormous undertaking. What was the catalyst? How did it all come to life?
Yeah, well, that's very high praise, and I appreciate it. I think New York City is one of those cities that is really trying to take a look at the intersection of our food system and the climate footprint associated with it. And this is, surprisingly novel. Like, we've all consumed food and had a food system for as long as as long as the human species has been on this earth. And yet it's an emerging area of practice to think about the intersection of food and climate. So a few years ago now, New York City took a look at all of the carbon emissions associated with different activities in the city. And, that includes everything from transit to purchasing to consumption to food. And we found that the third largest contributor to New York City's carbon footprint was our food system. And that's after buildings and transportation. Buildings and transportation you kind of expect, but food was sort of this like dark horse that emerged as a result of this inventory. And so we made the commitment, kind of recognizing that we have a huge opportunity to work on food. We made the commitment to reduce our food-based carbon emissions by 33% by 2030. And New York City is not alone in kind of looking at carbon emissions associated with food, but I would say we are sort of the largest urban and metropolitan city to really be taking a look at this program. And as a result of that commitment, we've made some significant changes to our programs regarding, what we're putting on the plate that I would love to tell you a little bit more about.
Excellent. Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know if you were going to tell us more about.
Oh, yeah. Why don't you do that? That might be a good back. So
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what is on the plate, because doing that and doing it across all the institutions is just unbelievable.
Yeah. So the philosophy behind a lot of the work that we've done is that we recognize that not all food is created equal. And what we mean by that is that certain foods have a much more significant impact on climate than others. And that's just because of the way certain foods are produced. Research from the World Resources Institute shows that essentially animal products, specifically products like ruminant meats and dairy, have the highest carbon footprint associated with any food product, about 20 times the footprint of a lot of other plant-based proteins, and just reflect a significant carbon opportunity cost. They require significant changes in land use, going from forested lands to agricultural lands or arable and grazing lands, and just have other really harmful downstream environmental impacts. So by understanding this differential impact of food, we were able to say, actually, what we put on our plate will have a very big impact on the carbon emissions associated with our food system. So that's where we began and started by just changing how we eat and shifting towards plates that are more plant rich, that use more whole and minimally processed plant-based proteins, and reduce our reliance on some of those animal products, again, in particular, ruminant meats and dairy. And that for us was not only a climate decision, but also a health decision as a way to improve the health outcomes of New Yorkers as we're looking at increasing life expectancy in New York and fighting chronic disease.
Yeah, but how'd you actually make it happen?
How did we make it happen? That is really where the rubber hits the road. So we knew that, I'll start by saying, like, food is incredibly personal. It's incredibly cultural. It's something that we all, despite where we come from, have strong, strong opinions about. And we have incredible cultural diversity here in New York City. So in approaching this, we wanted to make it so that all of the programs that we're implementing are, most importantly, gentle. They're subtle ways of implementing changes to the food system. They don't mandate any kind of food or don't take anything away from people. We don't want people to feel like their agency or their ability to choose what they put on their plate is compromised in any way. So all of the interventions that we made in New York City kind of follow this model of gentle nudges. I'll first talk a little bit about the programs, and then we can talk more about this sort of philosophy of gentle choice architecture. So we in New York City procure about $500 million worth of food every year in order to be able to serve New Yorkers at our public schools, at our hospitals, at correctional facilities, older adult centers, and homeless shelters. That's a lot of food that we're able to align with our values, whether that's around creating a valued workforce or building transparency in the food system, making sure that we're meeting standards for environmental sustainability and animal welfare. Across the agencies that serve food, we have food standards that determine the nutritional quality of those meals. And as part of those food standards, we set things like limits on sodium or minimum, fruits and vegetable serving requirements. One of the things that we implemented was a requirement to have at minimum one plant-based protein per week per meal type. So all agencies, as a result, are incorporating and including more plant-based proteins in their weekly meal service. The kind of flagship program of this larger portfolio has really been in the health and hospital system. And when Charlie mentioned Chef Phil, this is really what we were talking about. In the 11 public hospitals in New York City, we implemented something called a plant-based default. What that means is when patients are given meals in a hospital setting, the first meal that they're offered is called the chef's recommendation, and it's a plant-based meal. And if they don't want that, they can choose something else. Actually, the second choice they're given is also a plant-based option. And if they don't want that, then they can choose a third plate that has an animal protein. The reason behind this is we found, this is going back to the idea of gentle choice architecture, just by changing the default of what is offered first, patients are more than willing to stick with that plant-based option. So where before only about 5% of patients who maybe identified as vegan or vegetarian would choose that plant-based option, now over 50% of patients are sticking with that plant-based option. And it becomes this point of education where we can talk about how the plant-based meal is contributing to their health and recovery. It's part of the treatment. It's a form of food as medicine within our hospital system. And it allows them to feel like they're making an active choice in selecting the food that is being given to them. The last thing I'll say, and I could, again, talk about this for hours, is the most important part of this is that the food is of course, nutritious, ideally very, very delicious, but most importantly, culturally relevant. And because we have such diversity in New York City, we wanted to make sure that the food that we're serving in our hospitals are comforting and familiar and, tap into the flavors and taste profiles that a lot of our patients are most familiar with because they grew up eating those kinds of foods. So our food service partner, Sodexo, and we and other nonprofit partners engaged in a really comprehensive recipe development process to find recipes and modify recipes to be plant-based that utilize flavors, seasonings, and food traditions from all around the world. And as a result, have been able to kind of bring our patients into the process of creating delicious food, eating food that's nutritious, and then again, feeling like they're taking an active role in not just their health, but also building a more sustainable food system for New York City.
That
Yeah.
part of that was so brilliant, so brilliant.
Yeah, I
And
find
it
this
wasn't
really.
kale forward. That was the thing that I thought was very cool.
Wow.
Not kale forward.
I'm sure they did research on that, Charlie, and found that
Probably.
kale was polarizing for some people.
I'll bet there's kale in there. There's kale somewhere.
I'm sure there's kale
I'm
in there.
sure there is.
Well,
I'm sure there is.
As you talk about all of this, coming from a research background, and particularly a consumer background, just the tremendous amount of research that has to have gone on through all of this. And I'm just wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more about gentle choice architecture and the wording that you're using, because you threw out that number, which is a number that I have gotten from data sets before. About 5% of people are vegan, vegetarian. How did you land on plant-based versus vegetarian, flexitarian, or any other? Like, did you do research on that, or was that just we think this will work? I'm really curious.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of trial and error for sure. And this is where the social science and behavioral research is so impactful. We work with a nonprofit called Greener by Default, and we really utilize a lot of their research and expertise in this space to create that gentle choice architecture, starting just with the naming. I mean, you gave the example of vegan or vegetarian versus plant-based. We really wanted to indicate to people making choices about their food that choosing a plant-based option does not have anything to do with your identity. You don't have to identify as someone who always eats a plant-based meal or is concerned about, whether it's the environment or animals or whatever it is that might be driving your choices that day. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And in fact, we want to go for the audience that considers themselves to be flexitarians, people that aren't necessarily making strict, that aren't, following strict restrictions about what they eat, but rather look at the food that's available that day and choose what looks most delicious and right for them. By being able to make this a flexitarian movement, it's something that, one, I think is way more inclusive. It doesn't sort of require this purity test of, do I ever consume animal products or anything like that? But two, also create it to be something that we can get on board with through a number of different measures, because it's gentle, because it's something that has a number of different on-ramps and people can participate as much or as little as they would like. It doesn't create pushback. And that, I think, is the most important piece of this, is we wanted to make sure that we're making people still feel seen and heard in this process. So without dictating food choices, without necessarily saying we're taking all of the animal products away, this is just an option, and you can choose this option if it feels right for you. If not, you can choose a different option. Some of the other forms of gentle choice architecture that we implement, for example, are really simple. It's, prioritizing the plant-based meal, let's say, as the chef's recommendation or the chef's special, but also really simple things like changing the ratio of what's offered. If you have more plant-based meals offered, all of a sudden that feels abundant. It feels like something that anyone can choose, not just someone who's identified as vegan or vegetarian. And we have ratios in place already. More likely, it's that, you have, let's say, out of 5 meal options, you'll have 4 options with an animal protein and 1 option normally with a plant-based protein. What would it look like if we shifted that to 2 animal proteins and 3 plant-based proteins? Again, we're not taking anything away, but people still have the ability to make choices in a very non-judgmental, non-confrontational, non-identity based way.
Well, I think the other thing that you and Chef focused on during the presentation was everything was delicious and everything was beautiful, right? So it didn't feel like I was making a sacrifice, and it wasn't presented as here's your plant forward option. It was here's today's chef special. It's beautiful and it's delicious. Would you like to enjoy it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Mm-hmm.
smart, so smart.
And that kind of goes to my question, which I was going to ask about culture change, but I'm curious whether maybe that's not even the right word. Because like what you're talking about seems more like culture widening or just like putting something into its own, putting, like you mentioned, putting it already in the context of the culture that exists. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did you think about it? Is it a
Yeah.
culture change or is it something different in your mind?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think like culture widening is an interesting terminology to think about. We wanted to make it so that it didn't feel like a huge cultural shift overnight. We wanted it to feel actually like, sort of familiar and something that people could get on board with without having to really change their philosophy around food.
Mm.
And that's also why the cultural relevance of the meals that we serve matters. We're tapping into a lot of foods that are by default plant-based. We look at a lot of cultures around the world that have for millennia used plant-based proteins kind of just because that's what was traditional and what was important to that foodway. And that itself has allowed us to make it something that one isn't just a particular kind of audience that can participate, but also feel like something that is actually returning to an original sort of way of eating as opposed to introducing necessarily something new.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would just say is we also kind of recognize that choice architecture and defaults are already happening whether or not we see
Mm.
them. And this is the key point, is that when we go into any kind of system, there are circumstances that guide our decision making, regardless of whether or not we can see them. That's just what happens by default. And a great example of this is when you're at a grocery store, what you see at eye level versus up on the top shelves or the shelves down below really impacts consumer purchasing, as does having, treats like gum and candy and soda right up at the front of the counter when you're decision fatigued and you're ready to get out of the store and want a little bit of that dopamine hit. So why not use that same choice architecture for good and say defaults already exist, that choice architecture already exists. Let's just kind of tweak it so that we can help people make the greener choice without even
Mm.
really noticing it. It can be something that's so subtle, and they, don't necessarily need to, again, identify as someone making a change. It can just be the delicious and healthy and easy option that day.
I'm curious, you mentioned that you're going after flexitarians are probably your main, but I know that like you mentioned that a lot of the movement has been in like the hospital and healthcare systems and
Mhm.
things like that. And I, not that it should think of them as an older group, but I think of like my dad. My dad was like, if he did not have meat in a meal,
Yes.
it wasn't that he was physically hungry. He was mentally hungry still. Because I'd give him a vegetarian meal and he'd be like, I'm still kind of hungry. I'm like, but you ate a lot. And he would be like, yeah, but I didn't get meat, you see.
Sure,
So
sure,
I'm
sure.
curious whether or not do you try to appeal to those folks or you just be like, well, you know what? It's the fourth choice or third choice on the menu. We're just going to let them have that. And or is there do any kind of additional push, so to speak?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. And I think the idea of the movement is that it's inclusive of all kinds of eaters. So we
Right.
definitely do not want to alienate a group that says, I just need meat in order to feel satisfied. That's okay. And for those kinds of folks, we would probably implement practices that maybe just decenter meat from the
Yeah.
plate. And that's a lot of what we do across our other agencies too. Maybe the entire meal is not plant-based, but you fill up on plant-based proteins and fruits and vegetables and grains, and then
Right.
meat can be a supplement or something you bring in on the side so that it still fulfills whatever, flavor profile or taste that you're going to. Maybe mentally feels a little bit more satisfying for folks,
Mhm.
but we're shifting away from a way of eating where meat is the be all end all of our plate, and really thinking about, I really like to reference more research done by World Resources Institute that talks about less and better meat. If we can
Mm.
kind of shift our understanding of how meat plays a role in the plate, we can also invest in higher quality, better meat that meets additional environmental standards or animal welfare standards, and still provide it for folks that feel like it's a necessary part of their diet.
Can I ask a quick question? Or are we
No.
out of time, Charlie?
No, yes, you can ask a question.
Okay. I'm really curious how this plays out with the City of New York initiatives versus the corporate work that you do. Like I'm thinking about sporting event, like people
Yes.
want hot dogs and hamburgers. And so I don't want to make the assumption, you've been talking about inclusivity, keeping people's agency, and I'm sure that applies on both sides. But can you talk a little bit about how maybe you shift or things look differently on the corporate side versus the City of New York side?
Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic question. I would say that a lot of the kind of techniques that we use in the public procurement side work very, very well for the setting that we're in. And we actually just have a lot more creativity on the corporate side because we're a little bit less restricted in what we can do. So an example, you said, sporting events. One of our partners in this work through a program that we call the Plant Powered Carbon Challenge. It's a corporate sector challenge that allows businesses to essentially do a lot of the same things that we're doing on the City of New York side, just through their own menus. The US Open is actually one of our first sports competitions to participate in this challenge. And the way they're thinking about it is, to look at, yes, maybe people want the hamburgers and hot dogs, but there's a lot of food consumption that isn't just, the consumer, the fan coming into the stadium and choosing one option. They have executive dining rooms, they have catering events. They also feed their athletes. And this is, I think, some of the most interesting work, especially when we think about sports, where the intersection of food, performance, climate are really coming to a head. So just with the US Open, I'll kind of give you the example. Last year, when we went to the Open around August, it was unbelievably hot. The temperatures were in the hundreds, and athletes were having difficulty playing because of the heat. And it was sort of a reminder of the urgency of climate work as we're experiencing just like, unprecedented heat waves. And we see athletes taking more and more of an interest in working on climate. And at the same time, they have to be at the top of their physical, ability. They're at their peak performance. And a lot of them follow plant forward diets just because that's what makes them feel the best. So at the US Open, we were kind of able to bring together these three ideas of like performance and athleticism, climate on the one hand, and then the importance of food to really make the case for offering additional options at the US Open. And we didn't take away the hot dogs or the hamburgers, we just added options to the menus so that athletes, staff, but also fans that come in and, are thinking about these issues as well, or think that that menu option looks delicious, can make that choice.
Excellent. Okay, Neeti, one last question, and then we'll move over to the quiz. So one of the things that I thought was really amazing was all of the stakeholder engagement that you and Chef Phil did to make this work. So tell me a little bit about your stakeholder mapping process and then the process you use to build support and engagement with all those different stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I should say I can't take credit for that. Like, this is really a full, like, citywide effort, and we really, really are grateful for our partners at Health and Hospitals that have been running this work. I think Chef Phil is a fantastic, like, representative for the work, and especially when we get to stakeholder mapping, like, this is where we rely on the expertise of Sodexo to make the entire experience feel like an elevated dining and food experience. So they wanted to talk to staff and employees at every level of the hospital system so that people felt engaged in the process. It didn't just start with, the CEO or the director of the program making this decision. They talked with all of the dietitians and food service staff at the hospital. They engaged in sort of a road show where they went around to the different hospitals and trained folks on how we're going to be talking about the food, even down to, this is Chef Phil's favorite story, they even talked to the folks, the custodial staff in the rooms to say, the comments that you make about the food matter to the patients. If you come around and say, oh, that doesn't look very good, as you're cleaning up the plate, that has an impact. Whereas if you can, be a part of this process to encourage the kinds of changes that we're making here, that makes everyone feel more on board. And we've just had so much good engagement from every single member of the health and hospital staff to make this feel like a really like a town effort coming together. It's not just a top down thing. It's something that we all can get behind. And, now we have kind of fans of the program at every level going out and sharing their story about health and hospitals and about the plant-based program. That's why I think it's been so successful, and speaks to the importance of, exactly as you said, that stakeholder mapping process.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, again, I'll just come back to as we close out this portion was, Chef Phil was adamant about the fact that this is about food. First and foremost, this is about food, and it has to be beautiful and it has to be delicious, right? And I thought that was such a key component of this, because mission-focused food has an entirely different perspective, and I don't think you go from 5% to 50% with mission-focused food. If food is beautiful and it's delicious, oh, and by the way, it happens to be plant-forward, count me in. Right. So, I mean, the whole strategy was just fantastic. And I was so impressed when when the two of you presented it. And I'm very, very grateful for the time that you were willing to spend with us. Now we're going to transition to a very fun part of the show, which is Kevin's quiz. And we have no idea where he's going any week. And we hope that you'll stick around and participate in the quiz, because we have no idea what's going to happen next. So I will turn it over to the 3Squares Quizmaster. We got to get some music. We got to get like a little. We got to get some kind of little music tag to go in here for that going forward. All right, here we go.
This week, this month, it's spices, herbs, and extracts. I don't know why, just because I felt like doing it. So question 1. King Charles II of England's favorite dish was reportedly eggs flavored with what unusual seasoning? Was it A, powdered deer antler, because it was supposed to be an aphrodisiac? B, powdered whale intestinal stones, which were described as partly earthy, partly fecal in smell, and so strong that it made the whole palace smell. C, ground pearls, because crushed oyster shells were a common seasoning in the 17th century, and he thought pearls would be better. Or D, fermented earthworms, apparently tasted very nutty and sweet.
I'm going pearls because I can't stomach anything
They're
else.
all disgusting. They're all disgusting.
And he
I'm
thinks
gonna
of
go
the.
with, I'm going to go with fermented worms.
Fermented worms.
Yeah, I was going to say worms too. There is a growing movement to bring insects into our food system. I am not a subscriber to that, but cricket burgers are a thing.
That's true, but you're all wrong.
That's been around forever.
It's actually B. It's actually the powdered whale intestinal stones,
my
also known
gosh.
as ambergris. So ambergris, if you ever find ambergris, you sometimes find it on beaches. It's a stone from the intestine of a whale. Some scientists think that it might be like an irritation caused by eating like giant squid beaks that don't digest well.
I hate
it
when that
causes
happens.
a buildup. It floats to the top, lands on the ocean. If you ever find one, and you're near a country where you can sell it, it's illegal in the United States to even trade in it, but in the UK and other places you can. It is worth thousands. A small stone is worth $10,000, $20,000 because it's used in perfume. It's used in lots of stuff. So ambergris. Number 2, vanilla is one of the most labor-intensive crops in the world. Why is it so labor-intense? Is it A, the vanilla bean must be harvested at night? The pods release essential oils that evaporate quickly in the heat, so farmers must pick them when they're cool nighttime hours. Is it B, vanilla flowers only open when the humidity is exactly 78%, so they must monitor it and then get it done as quickly as possible? Is it C, all commercial vanilla must be hand-pollinated? The only bees able to pollinate the vanilla orchid are uncommon bee native to Mexico? Or is it D, vanilla vines must be braided together for maximum growth and stability? Natural vanilla falls into the ground too easily, doesn't support a lot of the orchids, so farmers must spend hours intertwining the vines in order for them to grow.
I'm going to go A. It has to be picked at night.
Picked at night.
Interesting. I'm going to go C. I think the hand pollination, because of a mismatch in the pollinator population, makes sense to me.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are correct. It is the hand pollinated. So there
Mm.
is only one bee, actually two bees that do it, but for now, they just do it. All of them are commercially hand pollinated.
Well,
So
if those
that
two
is
bees got together and learned about the birds and the bees, then there might be more of them.
I had
All
some
right.
insider information on that one. I studied bees in college.
Oh, well, there you go.
Oh,
3, the historian and teller of great stories, Pliny the Elder, wrote that cinnamon sticks in the ancient world were harvested in what unusual manner? So this is like his dreams of how they were harvested. Did he say that cinnamon sticks were harvested by harvesters saying to the trees to make the bark loosen? Was it B, cinnamon was collected by trained monkeys, and then the monkeys had to go into dangerous territories, collect the cinnamon sticks, and come back? Is it C, the bark was harvested with golden sickles, and he claimed that you had to cut it with a golden sickle? Or was it D, cinnamon was stolen from giant birds' nest, and that massive birds supposedly collected them, and then people had to go and get the birds at their own peril, get the sticks at their own peril?
I'm going to go with the golden sickle.
Golden sickle seems the most likely.
Oh, wow. I was going to go there, but now I can't.
Sure, you can. Sure, you can all pile on.
Then we could all be wrong.
That's
I'm going
right.
to
It's better
say
to
they
diversify.
sang to the trees and the bark loosened.
You're all incorrect. It was actually giant birds' nest. So there, you can
That's my
find.
second
I've
choice.
seen this. I've seen this. Like I've seen manuscripts where the people actually got into this story. They actually drew pictures of cinnamon birds and everything. It's just,
Okay,
and all of it was a way for the traders of spice to jack up the prices and say we had great peril to board.
But I want to go back to you've seen manuscripts.
I've seen
Okay,
manuscripts.
Where?
I've seen it.
Where?
I have seen it in England. If you go to, I think it's the History Museum. I'm trying to remember the name of it. You can see the manuscripts of originally Pliny the Elder's, like, and people who were talking about it. You could see the manuscripts.
I mean, this is just a whole other
I can
level.
show you. I can
Yeah.
show you. I'll see.
Yeah,
if I can-
Kevin is a master.
4.
Yeah. 4.
What culinary item was called Russian penicillin during World War II because it was used as a makeshift antibiotic? Was it A, garlic paste? The antibiotic nature of garlic has been known for centuries, and a poultice of garlic was used to treat wounds. Was it B, rye bread mold? So some soldiers actually applied moldy rye bread to their wounds. Was it C, vodka? They just use it as a disinfectant and painkiller. Or was it D, a mustard paste, which was applied to the chest and other areas where they thought it would fight infection? Which one of those was called Russian penicillin during World War II?
Well, vodka's the most obvious choice, but it might be
Seems
too
too
obvious.
easy.
Yeah. I'm going to go with garlic paste.
Okay.
And
So-
what would
sometime-
be?
I mean, it
B
could be
was
Occam's
rye
razor,
bread
right?
mold.
You just go with vodka. I don't know. I'm going to go
Garlic
with garlic.
paste,
I'm
rye
going.
bread mold,
Yep.
vodka, or mustard?
I'm going to go with rye bread mold.
Okay.
I am
Susan?
too, because I think they actually had access to that.
Garlic
Right.
paste. Okay, here we go.
Charlie is correct. It is garlic paste. So it was used as a coating on wounds. Yeah. So all right, last one. Cloves and clove oil have traditionally been used for all of the following except one. Which one has cloves not traditionally been used for? Is it A, cloves were used in dentistry because clove oil has a numbing effect? Is it B, clove oil has been used for oiling Japanese swords? A light coating protects the blades from rusting. Is it C, cloves and clove oil were traditionally put on bed sheets to keep insects away? Or was it D, cloves were added to holy water used in ritual purification?
Insects in bed.
Insects in bed.
Japanese swords.
You are all incorrect. All
Holy
of
water.
those holy water. Holy water. Now,
Water.
chrism, which is holy oil, that has been used with clove, but holy water is usually not given any type of herbal.
No additives.
Not traditionally. So, but the rest of them, Japanese sword. I actually was on a website yesterday where they were selling clove oil with Japanese swords. I was making sure. And then dentistry, absolutely. And then bed sheets. Oh yes, clove oil and putting cloves into your bed sheets to get rid of all types of insects is.
Oh, wait.
traditional.
The question
I
was
fully
which one was
misunderstood this question.
Yeah, which
Wh-
one
I
is
did
incorrect?
was it?
Susan and I
Was
are
it
on the
not?
same
Yeah,
page.
Was is not.
No,
Which one
yeah.
is not? So all of them are true except for holy water.
Ah.
Got it. Got
I
it.
think
Okay.
we tied. I think it was a three-way
We did tie a
I
three-way
think
tie.
you did. You did
A
tie.
three-way tie of
Look at that.
mediocrity. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of where we were.
Mediocrity. We're so mediocre.
All right,
Neeti,
Neeti,
sorry to
thank you.
draw you into mediocrity. I'm sorry.
No,
That's
no,
good.
you would think would know more about food, spices, and herbs as someone who works in food, but those were
Well,
some great
we all do, and
questions.
none of us did. So there you
I
go.
know.
Well, Neeti, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We were thrilled. We could have gone on for much longer than we did, but we really appreciate the time and the great work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing some of that. Here's a special note. We will have our first live 3 Squares on March the 12th. The time will probably be 7:30-ish, maybe 8 o'clock Central Time. So watch our social media feeds for more detail on that. But it'll be the
PM,
first
right?
time, PM, yes, ma'am, PM.
PM.
This will be the first time the three of us have been physically together ever. We've been doing this for 5 years, and the three of us have never been physically together in any place. So this will be a lot of fun for us. We hope you will enjoy it as well. As always, thank you for joining us. You can always send us comments on 3squaresmail@gmail.com. That's a numeral 3squaresmail@gmail.com. Until next month, enjoy yourself, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Neeti.
Bye.
Bye now.